So right now I'm in Colorado. Why? I guess I don't really know. All of last week I was in Montana. Why was I in Montana? I also don't really know that. Why are any of us ever anywhere? Now, of course, there was a reason that I was in Montana, just as there is a reason right now that I'm in Colorado. But when you boil it down to sort of the fundamental particles of why, it doesn't really make a ton of sense why we're ever anywhere. This is especially complicated once you start to work in the dimension of time as well. Who you are now differs from who you were and who you will be, but we know who we were and we don't know who we will become. There's this sort of collapsing of the wave function that happens at every second of our lives. We continue to solidify who we will become by being who we currently are. So there was a reason that I was in Montana. The reason was that I was checking out graduate school. I applied to a graduate school in documentary filmmaking, and I wanted to go see what it was actually like to be there. Granted, it's peak winter, so it was well below freezing the entire time I was there. And there was something about that made me feel alive, made me feel like I was supposed to be there, even if I don't really know why. But so why was I checking out graduate school there? Well, because I'm interested in documentary filmmaking. I'm interested in telling the stories of science through film. What is it about that attracts me? Now, I don't really know, or at least I didn't until pretty recently. I'm interested in documentary film right now, most obviously because I work as a planetarium presenter. I've learned how to be a science communicator around the topics of Earth and space science, and I wanted my science communication to last longer than I was on stage. So why did I start working as a presenter at the planetarium? Well, I did that because I wanted to communicate science, and I wanted to communicate science in a way that existed through time. Previously, months prior, I had started science writing. I was loving what I was learning about astrophysics and planetary science, and I wanted to tell others what I was learning about. But what made me feel confident to venture into science writing when I wasn't done with my degree yet? Well, it was what I was actually studying. I decided to study astronomy and philosophy, which meant that I was learning about the science itself, and then I was also learning about how to think about the cogs and the gears within. I was learning how to write and read and think critically and present ideas that are immensely complicated. But why did I choose to study those two things? Well, I love science, right? And I love thinking about science. So that was the nexus of that decision. So you see what I mean? The thing that I ended up studying in university boils down to who I was as a kid. Ultimately, when I was a kid, I had encyclopedia books of meteorology and geology and astronomy, everything under the sun. I wanted to learn about how the world worked. Now, you don't come across kids that are interested in philosophy that often because that would be crazy. But when I was older and it sort of through the pandemic, I was trying to learn about who I was, why I was living the way I was living, I decided to read some books on philosophy. Now you see what I'm sort of doing here, right? When you reduce the why, it starts to become more and more abstract. Why was I into science as a kid? That I don't know. That's a fundamental piece of my code that's written into my genes. It's something about who I am that makes me want to investigate the world and how it works. Now, related to the arc of this whole story, there was one other thing that I was really into when I was a kid that I sort of forgot about. I forgot about it multiple times throughout my history up until this point. And that is cameras, photography, filmmaking. When I was a kid, I used to run around with a camera and create little movies about my life. I would bring my camera everywhere and photograph the world as I saw it through my own lens. Now, unlike science, I forgot about cameras. I forgot about telling stories through lenses. That's something that I had to forget and remember over and over again. This is the amnesia of becoming yourself. Now, this might seem crazy, but it actually mirrors itself in history quite a bit as well, specifically the history of science. In the Western world, who do we credit with the invention of the heliocentric solar system model? That's the model that put the sun at the center of the solar system. We don't credit the person who actually came up with it. We credit the person who people remembered came up with it. The person who we remember is Copernicus. It wasn't Copernicus who came up with the heliocentric model. It was a guy named Aristarchus from ancient Greece some 1500 plus years earlier. Now, when Aristarchus came up with the heliocentric model, people weren't ready to hear it. People weren't ready to put the sun at the center of the so-called universe yet. They were still in that sort of dogma of thinking that humans are the center of everything. This mirrors exactly how I felt about filmmaking and photography. I wasn't ready to hear it yet. I wasn't ready to hear that filmmaking should be what I'm pursuing. The universe tried over and over again to get me into filmmaking in any sort of consistent fashion, but I wasn't ready to listen. Like I said, this is the amnesia of becoming yourself. We are all on the paths to becoming our own telos, but we won't hear what we need to until we're ready to listen to it. So in spite of this amnesia, sort of against the entropy of us becoming ourselves, the universe will try and try again until you're ready to hear what it is you're supposed to be doing. Now, regarding all this, we must too remember that the present is the future's past. Someday we will look at the dogma that we are within and that we struggle to break free of with regards to science and ourselves. Right now, I'm sure there are things that I'll look back on and think, what was he doing? Why was that so unclear to him? Similarly, in 300 years, we will look back on scientists of today as we look back on scientists of 300 years ago. Why didn't Newton come up with Minkowskian spacetime? Well, because Minkowski had to come up with Minkowskian spacetime, and he had to collaborate with Einstein in order to figure out general relativity mathematically. Be it with regards to the history of science or the history of ourselves, we aren't ready to hear what we aren't ready to listen to. Right now in science, there are two unaccounted for miracles. One of these is the Big Bang. Astrophysicists look out and they see that distant galaxies are receding away from us. They see that more distant galaxies are receding away from us more rapidly. And so they've worked backwards from that point to figure out how old the universe is and that it must have begun from a single point. What came before that point? Well, according to astrophysicists and cosmologists, there was no before that point. That point was the beginning of space and time. That is a very unsatisfactory answer. This is where philosophers talk about unmoved movers. This is where science breaks into philosophy. Now, another realm where science breaks into philosophy is with consciousness, the philosophy of mind. Now, neuroscientists study the brain, but as much as we've studied the brain, we can't figure out where consciousness comes from. Is there some sort of mind-body dualism? We don't know. Is there consciousness baked into the fundamental constituents of the universe? We don't know. Now, those are the two miracles that we ask for: the origins of the universe and the origins of consciousness. Now, these are things that perhaps one day we will look back on and think, how did it not seem clear to us? Just as right now, I'm looking back on my 16-year-old self thinking, how did he not become a filmmaker sooner? What did he miss? Why wasn't he thinking through that lens? And I don't know. But that is the amnesia of becoming yourself. Just as I have forgotten before that I love to make films and tell stories through this, so too will I forget other important things going forward. In the future, we might once again forget as a society scientific principles that now seem to us obvious. That is the amnesia of scientific progression. And there's something tragic about that amnesia. We seem to work backwards. Scientific progress, just like personal progress, is nonlinear. But there's also something beautiful about that meandering, that making of mistakes, that forget. We have to forget important things so that they mean more to us when they return. Aristarchus came up with heliocentrism 1,500 years plus before Copernicus did. Nobody was ready to listen, so that sort of discovery, that theory, meant little to them. But then, after Aristarchus, mathematicians and astronomers tried desperately for about 2,000 years to come up with a solar system model that accounted for the meandering, the wandering of the planets throughout the sky from night to night. So, after 2,000 years of struggle and heartache across generations of scientists and mathematicians, when Copernicus finally set it in stone and people were ready to listen, more or less, it really meant something. So right now in my life, after I've tried filmmaking so many times and forgotten, it means more to me now that I've realized that the missing ingredient was talking about science, telling the stories of science through a lens. So that is why, just like entropy, I strive to embrace the amnesia of becoming myself. I want to remember what it means to forget.